Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. My name's Steph, and I'm broadcasting to you from our brand new recording suite at the National Centre for Writing in the heart of Norwich City of Literature. Today, I'm very excited to introduce a chat with novelist and screenwriter Eimear McBride, who is perhaps best known for her award-winning debut novel, A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, which exploded onto the literary scene in 2013. As a former resident of Norwich, we're delighted to welcome Eimear back to discuss her latest novel, The City Changes Its Face, the power of language, and the ways that literary fiction can evoke emotion and connection. For those who are new to Eimear's work, she is the award-winning author of 4 novels, A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, The Lesser Bohemians, Strange Hotel, and The City Changes Its Face. A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing won the inaugural Goldsmiths Prize, Irish Novel of the Year, the Bailey's Prize for Women's Fiction, the Desmond Elliott Prize, and the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Award. The City Changes Its Face is a continuation of this novel and follows an intense story of passion, jealousy, and family. Eimear sat down with her friend Chris Gribble, who just so happens to be NCW's former chief executive and a lifelong lover of books, to chat about the process of returning to characters and storylines that she had previously written. She talks about her experience of adapting her novel into a screenplay and the machine of writing and publishing, going from that solitary task of writing to the hustle and bustle of book tours and literary events. So without further ado, I will hand over into the very capable hands of Chris Gribble in conversation with Eimear McBride.
Well, good morning, Eimear McBride. Welcome to the Writing Life podcast on this last day of February 2025. How are you?
I am quite tired, but very happy to be here. I've been doing a bit of book touring, so could do with a lie-in.
Excellent. Well, I think that's got to be kind of top of the list, surely, for your next steps. Well, I am joined this morning by Eimear McBride, the winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Goldsmiths Prize, the James Tait Black Prize for Fiction, garlanded with all sorts of awards and reviews, and a writer of short stories, novels, screenplays, and director as well, which we'll come on to later in the conversation. And it's just an amazing opportunity to talk to Eimear about The City Changes Its Face, her new novel, which was published, a matter of days ago, I think, formally, and is now out in the world. Eimear, you said you're tired. You're in the middle of a book tour. What's been happening? Where have you been?
Well, I've been up to the lovely people at Portobello Books in Edinburgh, and then down to Waterstones Deansgate in Manchester. I got back last night. I've been doing the rounds in Bath and Bristol and Fair Norwich, of course.
Yeah, fantastic. People's Republic of Deansgate, Waterstones was my old stamping ground back in the day when I had my first job in publishing, in book selling rather. Brilliant place.
It's a fine shop, I must say.
It is indeed. What is this part of the kind of the book machine like for the writer? How long ago did you finish the novel?
I finished it about probably 9 months ago, by and large, maybe a little bit of proofing since then. And then, of course, it all goes quiet for that period while you're waiting for it to come out. And there's bits and pieces to do, but it's kind of covers and that sort of thing. And then suddenly you're kind of thrust out into the world of this horrible sense of anticipation. What's going to happen? Who's going to kick me? Who's going to, like it? What will people say? And then also just trying not to engage too much with that and just get on with going out. But it's, the touring it's a strange thing because, the writing life is supposed to be quiet and solitary, and so much of it is. And then suddenly, there you are on stage.
Yeah. And being asked all sorts of questions that aren't restricted at all to what you've written.
No, I mean, really, whatever someone wants to ask you, they can ask you, and you're stuck there on the stage. Hopefully and largely it is about the book, but sometimes it does get a little peculiar. So it's also learning how to work around that sort of thing, not answer things you don't feel that you should be obliged to.
Well, quite. Have you kind of developed some sort of survival mechanisms?
Yes, I think very early on, Anne Enright had warned me that, if you get asked something you don't answer, just answer the thing that you want to have been asked. And it's quite difficult for people to come back, to push back on that one. So, but of course, mostly it's fine. It is sort of about the book or one of the other books. And,
Has that kind of anticipation and that anxiety changed at all from kind of the early days of Girls a Half-Formed Thing through kind of next novels and now to here?
Well, I think when it was A Girl as a Half-Formed Thing, obviously that was the first, and I approached the whole kind of audience process with blind panic. And, I really didn't know how to deal with it at all and didn't know what to expect. I was very anxious about the whole thing. I think I'm less anxious now. I'm much more, well, it's in the lap of the gods. Here goes. Let's hope it goes well. And just, try and be in the moment with it and see what happens. And actually that takes a lot of the stress out of it.
Savour the chicken sandwiches.
Savour the many chicken sandwiches that you eat on the trains, the occasional Mars bar, late night, burger somewhere terrible.
You kind of mentioned that there's a degree of anxiety and anticipation about what people are going to say, and I think who's going to kick you is what you said.
Yes.
And then kind of also the energy you expend in trying not to engage too much with that. Where do you meet it? Do you read the reviews? Do you absorb it?
No, I've been trying very hard not to, because really, what's the point? And I have told all friends and family, don't send me reviews. But of course, when there's a particularly nice one, everyone ignores it and says, no, but this is the one you should read. And then, sort of weakness and vanity means that I do read it. But yeah, I just, there's no kind of good can come out of reading your own reviews, I don't think. You don't really remember the good ones, and the bad ones sting for a long time, however idiotic they might be.
Yeah. It's such a conundrum.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you're not obliged to engage.
No.
That's a choice. And because, I don't engage with the world in lots of ways, particularly social media, that is easier.
Yeah.
If I was very involved with that, I wouldn't be able to escape it in the same way.
Can I be very cheeky and read you my favourite sentence from one of the reviews I read?
Go on, then.
Well, first of all, you must be delighted by proxy because they've been brilliant reviews, which is fantastic. But there's a particular one in the Irish Examiner where the reviewer said, I thought I'd wait until she wrote something more upbeat, but then when describing how she was originally put off reading, it changes its face, but she rapidly changed her mind and gave you a brilliant review.
Well, that's good. It was clearly upbeat enough for her. I'll take that into my next novel. Remember upbeat. Never mind quotes from Joyce stuck on the wall.
No, Anna and Wright.
Yeah. Cheer up, love. It might not happen.
Yeah, well, have you heard of Uplit? That could be your new thing.
That would be radical for me. That would, that really would be experimental.
What was it like kind of going back to these characters and this place and this relationship after kind of writing about it, first of all, in the Lesser Bohemians?
I really loved it. I knew that there was going to be another book for quite a long time. Even when I was writing the Lesser Bohemians, I had a feeling that there would be more later on. And I was really pleased. I had meant to write this immediately after Lesser Bohemians, and then Strange Hotel kind of got in the way and other things. And so I was really ready for it when I kind of sat down and thought, okay, this is it. But of course, I still didn't know what I was doing. I still had to discover what the book was about. But it was nice to start a book where I already had a starting point, which was the characters. I knew who they were and didn't have to begin from scratch.
What did that enable you to do in your writing that was different? The fact that you had those kind of people at your disposal?
I think it gave me more freedom to play around with the form. And I think City does contain a lot of things that I had not really gone into before. I think technically there was a lot more that happened in the writing of this than had ever done before. There's different time streams and an attempted plot, which is not something that I had ever particularly concerned myself with in the past. I was always more interested in story rather than plot, but I did feel that this one required a little more attention to that than the previous novels.
We'll definitely come back to that kind of technical side because it works brilliantly, and the interweaving of those kind of different phases of time, and also the sheer amount of kind of diversity on the page with the text and the type that you use as well. It really, really works, and you can see that you can feel that there's more freedom there. It kind of somehow in the writing. But just quickly, that kind of difference between story and plot in your writer brain. What does one side say to the other about that?
Well, I had always thought that I would never be a plot person. For me, story is, it's about life. So most of my writing is really about trying to recreate life, people's lives. And, no life has a plot, but all lives have stories. And so that was sort of principle that I adhered to and didn't concern myself with kind of the things that might be required to propel a story forward, to propel a plot forward. It was just an unfolding rather than a kind of creation of different things that would then move it.
Is there a sense that you saw plot as limiting?
Not limiting, but just not really for me, just not something that I was interested in constructing. When I'm writing, I'm very much just involved in that story, very involved emotionally. And it's all about developing the logic and taking those characters to a sort of a place of inevitability. It arrives at an ending that it can only arrive at that one ending. Yeah. And so plot had always seemed to me something that you had to structure before you started writing, that you would then, all the writing would have to work around that. And whenever I had tried that in the past, it didn't work for me at all because I was immediately bored by what I was writing because I knew what was happening. I knew what points I had to hit, and the writing itself died and lost energy. But this time round, plot, it kind of came through organically. I didn't structure it, but I was aware of, okay, maybe don't put that information there. Wait, put it a little, push it off into the future a little bit, or lay a breadcrumb here, suggest something there, because you do want people. It's two people in a room talking. You do want people to remain interested in that.
And how far through writing were you before you realised that was what was happening here?
Oh, I think I was quite far. I think I was at least halfway in. I was like, oh, okay, there is another part of me at work here. It's never done anything before. It's finding it a bit weird. Not a natural part of my writing process to think about the experience of the book while I'm writing the book. So, but I do think it was having already so much knowledge about the characters already kind of just freed me up to do that.
You had kind of spare bits of your brain available to...
Yeah, it wasn't all kind of just suffocating inside the intensity of the moment.
Well, maybe it's kind of, not having just to use all of that power and effort to process the emotion and the story.
Yeah, I think so. It just freed it up, that's all, and it kind of allowed me time to, I suppose, play a little bit. It took some of the pressure off somehow.
Yeah, I think there's a really clear sense of playfulness in the novel, which comes in lots of different ways. There are some absolute cracking sort of ending of small sections on bits of such deadbeat humour that just make you just stop and laugh. I'm particularly thinking about the early chapter that ends with the word "we're heading towards cheese," which just made me laugh so much. But did you then go back to the first part of the book after you sort of made this discovery and re-edit again?
Well, when I came to the second draft, I then, of course, was more aware of, I also knew what the plot was. I didn't know when I started. And I was much more aware of, okay, maybe shift this around here. And the writing of the night section, of the long conversation section, was pretty much linear. But the other time stream of going back to over through the previous 2 years, those sections moved around a little bit as I became more aware of the requirement of the plot, I suppose.
And is there anything kind of in your professional creative life that you think has brought you to that place of kind of altering or kind of changing your sort of practice a bit?
No, I think with every book it changes. I think I've been earlier on in my career so preoccupied with language that really language is the thing that developed through the books. It's very in that very broken place in A Girl Is a Half-Formed Thing, and it begins to knit up as it goes through Lesser Bohemians, and then Strange Hotel is like, here's lots of words that are going to make you go far away from me and from the character. And I think this was the first time I was less preoccupied with language, that language felt more instinctive and I didn't worry about it quite as much.
I kind of also wanted it just as an inelegant way of kind of shoehorning the question of kind of screenwriting and directing in, because obviously Stephen's film plays a chunk of a role in this. And I just wondered if your work on screenwriting as well had kind of given you space to kind of, did you say, sort of think about the experience of the novel and rather than just writing it?
Yeah, I've been screenwriting now for a couple of years, and then in 2022 I wrote and directed a short film, but at that point I was already kind of warming up to write City. I had started it a few years before and then left it to one side, and I knew that Stephen's film would be in it in some way, and didn't realise it would be in it to the extent that it is. But I was very aware when I was making my short that this was going to be useful. I could, there was a sort of cynical part of my brain was like, remember this, notice these things. You're going to need them soon to put them to other purposes. And so it was quite fun to write that section, although it's sort of structured like a screenplay, as in you get the interior Holloway Road day, sort of, each section begins with a description of the scene the way you would get with a screenplay. It then doesn't follow screenplay mode at all and is like prose version of a film.
More novelistic almost than the rest of the novel.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of the non-film sections are much more filmic and much more screen-like. The dialogue is set out in a much clearer way than I've done it in the past. And actually the film is far more novelistic.
Just kind of on that kind of question about the language as well. How do you feel when the word experimental is tossed around all over your work? I'm just never convinced that it's a very useful word for your writing.
I think it's a bit of a weird one, that, because I know some people really hate it and think that it signifies failure, and it's like an attempt that hasn't quite got there, and to which I say penicillin. But I personally don't mind, but I do know that other people find it off-putting, and I think probably my publishers would prefer if I never use the word experimental, because I think it makes people feel as though they're in for a really, really hard time just reading the book itself. And I don't know if that's true. Of course, I don't know because I wrote it. But
so part of me suspects that some people use it to kind of give themselves a sense of achievement in the reading of it.
Yes, perhaps. And it's also it's a kind of a lazy way to describe the writing. Yeah. It's an easy way to say this is going to be a bit different to what you will normally get, but it does have an off-putting side to it, which I regret. So.
Yeah. Kind of going back to the kind of the screenwriting and directing as well, and just interested when you were talking about story and plot around that question of inevitability and the absolute sort of inexorability of that kind of development. Is there a kind of a relationship between your kind of screenwriting and directing work and that kind of sense of inexorable, inevitable development in your work?
Well, I think when you're screenwriting and when you're directing, you have to approach from a much more technical angle than you do. Well, certainly than I do when I'm writing a novel. You've got to know where you're getting to before you even start writing, or before you start directing. Everything, all the logic has to be laid out already, and that was useful, I think, for the writing of this, because there are so many moving parts inside the novel itself. To feel in control of them, it was quite useful and surprising to me, because that until I started to screenwrite, I had never thought about writing in that way. It had always just been sort of chaos and carnage.
9 to 5 chaos and carnage. And then how did you prepare for that screenwriting shift? Did you literally do screenwriting boot camp, or did you sit down with kind of the people that you loved most? Because I know that you're an absolute huge film lover.
Yes. No, it was really when Lesser Bohemians was optioned, and the film, I said to the film company, look, yes, you can option it, but I have to be the person to adapt it, because I didn't really want anyone's, it's a book that means an awful lot to me, and I didn't want anyone else having a say over it. And, fortunately, because of the nature of the writing, they just went, oh yeah, we think that's probably just as well. Have at it. And, and I was lucky. They were very patient with me. So I went away. I came back 3 or 4 months later with like a 300-page draft. It was a completely faithful rendering of the novel in every single way into screenplay. And they just sort of looked at it and smiled politely and said, please go away and come back with at least half of this, and no more than that. And that was really the moment when I started to understand screenwriting. I thought, okay, a book is the book, and it remains whatever happens. And what do I need to take from it in order to keep it the same story, the same characters, done in the same spirit, and what can I let go of? And then obviously I had to let go of all idea of internal monologue. How do I solve all of the problems of this relationship through visual means rather than through relentless voiceover, which everyone hates. defeats the purpose of making a film. That's just a novel, right? If it's just lots of people telling you how they're feeling, you've got to be able to find ways to tell that story through a different medium. And so that was really useful when it came to writing the film section of the novel, was realizing, okay, if I'm writing a film, I have to obey the rule of that, which is there can't be any internal monologue. All that I can describe is what can be seen on screen, and then possibly how the three people watching it feel about what they see. But actually, I've got to really try and make the reader feel what's happening on the screen as though they were watching a film, but using only the tools that you have when making a film, except of course I'm writing it. So
that makes it sound even more kind of a high wire trick.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't intended to do that. I thought there would be some scenes from the film, but it would be mostly about the reaction of people watching it. But as I started to write it, I realized that it didn't make sense to ask the reader to feel engaged with how they're feeling about it if they don't know what they're responding to. And so I kind of had this horrible moment where I was out walking in the street and I just said, oh shit, I'm going to have to write the whole bloody film now. I can't just dip in and out the way I had planned. I'm going to have to go the long way around. And that was a horrible moment of just thinking, oh no, this is going to be a lot.
Yeah.
I'm already trying to invent a novel and now I have to invent a film inside the novel as well.
And that means you have to kind of literally build the architecture and logic of that world before you can then start to render it in the prose which it was not meant to be rendered in.
Exactly. So, that was great. That was brilliant. That amazing revelation.
This habit of making life easy for yourself.
Yeah.
It's
not working out so well, apparently. Well, I think this is the legacy of going to a place like Drama Centre with all its kind of method, hardcore, like, if you're not suffering, you're not doing it right kind of ethos. Apparently, I have never been able to get rid of it.
Well, that's exactly what I was about to ask about next, thinking about kind of Stephen as an actor who then becomes a filmmaker, and also Stephen and Eilidh as well as actors, and maybe she isn't an actor anymore, who knows at this point. And also that's where you started as well, in that kind of dramatic arts world. Yep. How do you view that art form now, about being an actor, now you're being a writer?
I mean, I love actors. I think they get a really hard time, but I love them because by and large, they have really quite difficult lives. Very few of them ever become incredibly successful, and they get paid really badly. If you've ever looked at what equity minimum is, that's not good money. Right. And people spend their lives getting rejected and told that they're not wanted in order to get a job that then doesn't pay them well, for which, then people kind of laugh when they say they're actors and expect them to be sort of pretentious lovies. But they do all that because it's something that they love, they really love. And I respect that. I really respect that because, so I live in a profession where you get lots of rejection and poorly paid. Just, do it because you have to do it. And I find them interesting, and I love, this is of course completely broad. I'm sure there's some terrible human beings out there, but people who are quite funny and I have a good time with, and it's much less dry experience than hanging out with lots of writers.
You can't believe you're saying that.
I know. How could it be? And I suppose I love that sort of slightly ragtag life and the kind of the creativity and the insecurity and the anxiety of it, but also the sense of fulfillment that goes with it, and what it takes to be the kind of person who can withstand that life and continue that life. I
can really see the parallels in terms of the life that comes with both kind of professions, but I'm really interested in what that compulsion is. It feels like it must be a very different compulsion to be an actor than it is to be a writer, because there's such different acts, such different performances in a way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm sort of amazed at myself now that that's what I wanted to do when I was younger. And I thought a lot about it because I feel I am so temperamentally unsuited to it. But I think for me, it was a real confusion of a love of character and a love of language. And I thought that's the direction that those things had to go in. And then it was only later I kind of realized I wanted to be further back in the process. I wanted to be the person who was creating it rather than the person who was interpreting it.
So is there is there a kind of question of control there as well?
I mean, I'm a novelist, so obviously control is incredibly important to me. I like to have control of all of the aspects, and which is also, of course, why film directing appeals, because there is not the same degree of control, but there is a high level of control when you're directing.
Yeah, and in terms of kind of Stephen and Eiley, am I getting it right? Eiley?
Yes.
Yeah.
Eiley.
In terms of their kind of feeling about control and identity in their lives, did you play with their different views of kind of acting and performing in?
Well, probably less in City. I think it's there a bit because, Eiley's going to sort of a method drama school, so she's kind of coming from that background that I came from, whereas Stephen comes from much more traditional classical training and kind of takes the piss out of the method. But so they have a sort of an ongoing bicker about the qualities of both approaches. But I also think, he's in a production in the West End in City. That's what he comes in from on the night in question. Yeah. He's doing Dr. Faustus in the West End, which he's always wanted to play. And finally he's got the thing that he wants, but he's no longer sure that's what he wants anymore. And then he's made the film, and I think by the time he goes into rehearsal for Dr. Faustus again, he's kind of doubting whether he is still an actor or whether he's been changed by this process of writing and directing his own film. But he does feel that it is still for him, whereas I think for Eiley, it's moving in a different direction.
I mean, there's just a real sort of heart-stopping moment near the end when just a simple kind of Eiley says, "Was there an inside me? Or was there an inside me? Or was there an inside?" I don't know where to put that line, but it stopped me short when I read it. And it seemed to sort of pose that enormous question that your writing does about how far language can get us near human experience. How do you kind of feel about that kind of challenge now you're 15 years into this career?
I still think it's the thing that fiction can do that nothing else can do. But it often doesn't, and usually doesn't, but it can do. And I think that's the kind of the cold face that I'm still chiseling away at after 15 years is to try and find the way to get really close into that. And, and you can't do that with film. You can't do it in the same way with music and with other forms. Writing does allow you, but it doesn't allow you if you obey someone else's rules of how language is supposed to work, the imposed rules of how language is supposed to work. That's about a more generalized way of communicating, which of course we all have to do on a daily basis. Otherwise we would never be able to say anything to each other and be understood. But I think if what you're interested in is delving quite far down into the self, then that language is obstructive. Everyday language is obstructive rather than communicative. And you've got to just create language that creates a different kind of response inside the reader.
How long can you kind of stay at that coalface when you're writing?
Well, you mean in hours or years?
Literally, yeah. When you're physically writing, I'm thinking a lot at the minute about kind of language as obstruction, kind of in relation particularly to psychotherapy training, etc., and thinking about how language covers up as much as it exposes, and how difficult it can be to stay with the periods of time where language breaks down.
Yes.
And I just wonder how that feels on a daily basis as a writer.
I mean, obviously the kind of the moments of intensity are different to the kind of fiddling and faffing that goes on for most hours of the day. And often those very kind of intense sections in the novels are things that I just write once, maybe edit once, and I try not to, because in the past I've fiddled at them a lot and realised I killed them and had to go back to the first draft of that. But that's really about trying to make my own language capture what I think those moments are about, and then trusting that it is enough that people who are not me will understand that experience. And I think by and large people do, which tells me that, that connection of how we all work is very deep inside of us all, but very real, and that we really are able to understand each other at like deep levels. We're just not used to communicating at them, that's all.
And it takes sort of practice in some sorts of ways, or at least continued exposure and effort.
Yeah, it's not a natural state, and language doesn't occur naturally around it. It is trying to put something that is pre-linguistic into language.
Yeah, I had a sort of mad flash of thinking of what it would be like if Virginia Woolf went round the kitchen every morning talking in Virginia Woolfish sentences all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Coffee.
That's what happens in my house.
Oh, sure.
We're very McBridean, you know.
McBridean, I like it.
Well, someone's got to invent it, so it might as well be me.
And it's the control.
There you go. You see, I'm even creating my own critical language.
What happens next with kind of going back to the process of and the machine of publishing? What happens next now the book's out there in its original hardback format and you're in the middle of the publicity tour? And
I mean, really, it's just going from pillar to post and doing book festivals and going to bookshops and, you know, just sort of persuading people to take a punt on reading it.
Are the translation rights sold? Is it being translated at the minute?
I think, as with all of my books, very slow process getting it into translation. Come back to me in about 5 years and I'll have a few translations. There's a couple sold, but as always, it's quite a long time before it kind of builds up.
And do you have a US deal?
Yes, so I'm going to be published by Faber, who are going into the US.
Brilliant.
And since I've always had a good time with them, I thought, let's see what happens. So that August, I think, end of August, comes out in the US.
Okay, and so you'll be heading out there for...
Oh, well, I certainly hope so, for more prancing around and, you know, drawing attention to myself.
In terms of kind of hopping back to the Lesser Bohemians and screenplays and other work, what else is happening in the McBrideverse?
The McBrideverse is, well, you know, I have some screenplay commissions that I'm working on at the moment. So there's a couple of those at different stages of development. About to finish first draft of one, which is always a terrifying moment when you have to send that to a producer and hope that you did the thing they wanted you to do. Yeah, and trying to find funding for the film of Lesser Bohemians.
Yeah.
So I'm in a bit of a weird position with that one because BBC suddenly decided to have a freak out about it after 5 years of development and decided that the subject matter wasn't suitable. I'm saying, like, that's it late for that. But it's a bit of an odd one because it's a bit like being back in the days of A Girl Is a Thing, where everyone's like, oh, it's great, the script is great, we love it, we want you to direct it, that's, you know, we like the short, that's all fine, but we can't take a risk on it. And that feels very weird to be in that position again. So I need to find some kind of film financier, galley beggar person.
Yeah, depressing.
It is depressing, it's a lot of work, but producers and I are pretty determined. We know that the script is good, so on we go.
On you go. And kind of prose-wise, are there other things kind of bubbling away, or are you just being fallow? And
no, there's another book about Stephen and Eiley, the last one, and that is, I've got a few thousand words on the page. We'll see when it's the right time to really kind of start to go at that. I think it will probably be a while, probably needs a little bit of a gap between City before I can really kind of concentrate on it. But yeah, I'm feeling a bit weird. I always knew there was going to be 3 books and now there's only 1 left. It's a bit strange.
Yeah, honestly, just look at the history of pop bands, Eimear. You can 5 years down the line, you can go back. It's fine.
Yeah, it's true. They could just reappear in the shower.
Marion Keyes, you know, she can do it.
Well, if Marion could do it, then why not me?
Exactly. Do you find your kind of consumption of kind of other kind of arts or literature or novels, can you go back up? Do you drop down when you're writing really hard with other people's work?
I don't read a lot of fiction when I'm writing. I don't find that particularly useful. Or I read someone that I don't particularly like or admire. If I read writers that I really like, then
you hate reading? Is this a new thing?
Sight reading.
Great.
I think it's, well, just because if you read something that you really love, then of course, immediately, when you're in that state, when you're writing, you're quite open and you're very open to influence and you can just veer off into, you know, plagiarizing someone else very easily. Yeah. And so it's better to read someone who really writes in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. But mostly I would read nonfiction actually when I'm writing.
And kind of if you're reading any fiction that you love at the minute, who's out there that we should be aware of?
Oh, what do I love at the moment? Well, you know, I'm kind of going through some Graham McCrae Burnett books that I had not read. I just really love his writing. It's just clever and interesting, and I love the way he plays with form. I find that really fascinating. And I read a very interesting debut, which is not out yet, but will be out soon, called Nova Scotia House by Charlie Porter, which I think is really superb debut about a love affair in an older man, a younger man, sort of set during the AIDS crisis and also in the 90s. Of course, I'm extremely fond of revisiting in the imagination. So I think that's going to be good when that comes out.
Thank you so much, Eimear. It's been a joy to talk, and it is just, as ever, just brilliant to be able to spend time in your 1990s world. And just thank you for that again. And I'm really excited about book 3 whenever it comes out. Whenever that comes, we'll see you in Norwich.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it might be another 9 years, but Norwich will still be there, I'm sure.
I feel very certain about that. Yeah. Like many things, it will stay with us whether we like it or not. It's been a joy. Thank you so much for talking to us, Eimear.
Thanks, Chris.
A big thank you to Eimear McBride and Chris Gribble for their time. And don't forget to pick up a copy of The City Changes Its Face from your favourite independent bookshop or your local library. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Blue Sky and Instagram. We're on Facebook, and you can sign up to the NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation today on the website by going to the Support Us page. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a 5-star rating and a review, because this helps other writers to find us. Thanks again, keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.